the administration and having played a very, very important part. How do you see diversity in education now, and do you think that we are moving closer toward being the kind of society that Justice Warren and others believe that we ought to try to create, or do you think that that's slowly slipping away from us?
Well, I obviously think that we have not reached a point in this society when we can forget about affirmative action. I mean, you can't take a century of slavery and a century of segregated discrimination and overcome it from 1954 to 1991. I mean, you know, you began 1954 at scratch. I mean, our city right here was as segregated as Johannesburg, South Africa during the present apartheid. I mean, and so you just can't expect, without some compensatory value in society being extended to those against whom discrimination was most punishing, you can't expect to erase that in a quarter century or a half century. It's going to take some time. I'm sure there's going to come a time in this society when affirmative action and compensatory support for the have-nots won't be necessary. At least it won't be mandated by the courts. I'm sad over the recent trend of the Supreme Court of the United States to move against affirmative action. I think it's premature, and I think the society is going to be shortchanged. In some ways, you know better than I that since 1954, society has been revolutionized. I mean, you see it in the courthouse, you see it on juries, you see it in the job place, you see it in education. But, you know, race is still a deterrent in our society, and until the schools can become the test tube for all society, we're not really going to be able to make the progress in this country. We're not going to be able to make of it the melting pot that's envisioned in the concept that all of us are created equal.
Very good. We've got about 5 minutes, Mr. Seigenthaler. Let's look at business and education. Not long ago, we had in that same chair the Chancellor of Vanderbilt University talking about the Help Wanted campaign.
Yes.
And I think that some of that came out during the forum. And let's talk about how the participants saw the involvement of the business community, and whether or not there is some expectation that business might be able to either supplement or to perhaps replace the funding that we receive. And finally, let's say something about the federal government's involvement.
Right.
Because I think that we can't get around that.
Well, I think that first of all, with regard to Chancellor White and the Help Wanted program, I mean, he understands that issue better than anybody in this city, or anybody you could possibly get on this program. Nobody understands the Help Wanted program better than he. Nobody understands the need of it better than he. Truth of the matter is, there has to be a role for business to play. And one of the aspects of the discussion that night dealt with that very subject. We had two distinguished representatives from the business community whose companies are making a commitment to education. And Governor McWhorter invited more and more business involvement. However, while we recognize business can do a lot, we need to understand that businesses, because they're private, can select the way they choose to deal with the system of education. Businesses can adopt one school and not another. They may not adopt the school where the need is greatest in terms of providing helpful support. They may say, we want to help this school because this is where we have the most opportunity to produce scholars. Overall, I think business understands that if the quality of education in Tennessee is low, the quality of the workforce is going to be low. If they don't put money into education now, and they should put tax money into education now, but if they don't put money into education now, they're going to have to pay for it, training talent or importing talent down the road. So the time for business to take part, and that includes my business as well as every other business in this state, time to take part to the extent that you can afford it is now, when the state's in need and when the opportunity is great and the challenge is great.
Finally, a minute for the federal government. I think that that's about how much time was given on the forum.
Well, it was about that time. Milton Goldberg was there, and he said the federal government's not going to be able to provide much help. I'm sorry to say that the Secretary of Education, my friend, former Governor of Tennessee, Alexander, is pushing that voucher program. I think it's a mistake. I think it's self-defeating, but that came out on the program, too.
Very good. And Mr. Seigenthaler, let me thank you for coming by and giving us that very, very important information today. We certainly did not cover everything, but I think that our audience has a fairly good idea of the things that went into making that forum and the importance of that forum, even though some people might not have agreed to how important it was. And we just want to thank you for coming by and giving us that information. And not only that, we also would like to encourage our viewers to look at A Word on Words, because we've had an opportunity to see that on WCDN, and we were very, very encouraged, and it's a very, very informative kind of show. And let me encourage you to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Good morning.